Good morning. Thank you to both Representative Janelle Bynum and Jamie McLeod-Skinner for joining us today to talk about your run for Congress to represent Congressional District 5. You're running for the Democratic nomination. And I think what we'll do is we'll just start off by having Janelle, if you don't mind going first, to talk a little bit about why you're running and why you think you're the best choice for voters.
Well, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm State Representative Janelle Bynum. I am the choice for Congressional District 5. I'm a proven leader with 8 years of experience of legislative experience. I've represented a purple district for these last 4 terms here. And what that really means is that I'm a leader who knows how to listen. I'm a leader who understands compromise on the things that allow compromise. I'm the candidate who knows how to move big pieces of legislation that includes a lot of different voices and the concerns of the people. I'm also a person, I am a mom of 4. I'm trained as an electrical engineer. I am a small business owner, and I have served this district honorably because people have chosen me because they know that I'm the type of leader that understands the kitchen table issues. I first ran on a platform of passing opportunity along, and that meant centering our children's education. It meant making sure that women had options for reproductive health care. It meant making sure that we centered our environment in our decisions as well. So all of these things over the last 8 years have made me the leader that Oregonians in this area have chosen time and time again. I have a strong legislative history of passing not only like the CHIPS Act, which was $43 billion in investments coming back to Oregon with 6,000 jobs, Reproductive Health Equity Act, housing opportunities, 21 police accountability bills, 23 police accountability bills, over 80 million in mental health supports, growing the number of mental health providers. I could go on and on with the number of legislative victories that I have had and that my office has had in support of Oregonians around the state. For those reasons and more, I am the candidate, the only candidate that has beaten Lori Chavez-DeRemer not once, but twice, and I'm ready to do it a third time. The time is now for us to put politics aside and make sure that we are electing leaders who can actually move the ball and end the chaos in Washington.
Thank you. Jamie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running?
Sure, and just transition, I agree about the chaos in Washington, but bottom line is I'm the best match for Oregon values, relationships throughout the district, knowledge of the district, and best position to win in November. I have the ability, a proven ability to bridge the urban-rural divide and bring people together around the issues that Oregonians really care about. In the past 20 years, I've served in elected office for 12 years in both urban and rural areas, and those core focus of Oregon values will be my focus. That's being a consistent champion for protecting our democracy, our fundamental rights, our environment, and also working on working family and issues that seniors are concerned about. The number one attack that we're seeing right now across the country that we have to step up to and defend is the attack on abortion healthcare, ability to IVF and contraception. Those are things that need to be addressed in addition to a slew of other issues. My background, I'm an attorney, a civil engineer, and a small business owner, former union member. I finished high school in Southern Oregon. Actually, my first year of college was in the district at Lewis and Clark before going off to get my civil engineering degree from RPI, my master's in planning from Cornell, and later my law degree from the U of O, focused on natural resource law. I began my public service over in Bosnia and Kosovo just after the war, went on to resettle refugees, worked in city and regional planning on environmental issues, on water issues, on housing issues, worked in local government at the staff, management, and policy level. That international experience is important now. Experience in affordable housing and how we can help the state meet those goals is important. I've passed racial justice and equity policies in conservative rural Oregon, which is something that's been that real key of bringing people together around issues that our communities care about. I'm a stepmom of 4. My wife and I live in rural Central Oregon, as do my mom, my sister, my in-laws, my wife's folks, who came from ranching stock in Eastern Oregon. And then bottom line, winning Oregon's 5th congressional district involves being able to win both in the metro area, but also outside the metro area. So my track record of success in all of Clackamas County, not just the northern bit, but also in Central Oregon, Deschutes County, is going to be key to being able to not just win this district, but also serve Oregonians well. And so I'm really excited about the conversation today. I'm delighted you're actually going to have it. You're going to post it, because it's been some challenge to try to get some debate set up. So really appreciate this conversation today.
Great, thank you. I'd like to kind of piggyback off of what you just said, Jamie, and ask you this question first. But the 5th district has there are more non-affiliated voters than either Democrats or Republicans in this district. I guess, how can you point to specific stances that you think are reflective of just sort of that kind of more moderate or I guess less party identified positions?
Absolutely. And actually, to that point, I've consistently also received the support of the Independent Party of Oregon and other organizations, well, because of the point you're raising. So here's the bottom line that I've said across the district, across the state, really, is regardless of party affiliation, we all want to be able to put a roof over our head and food on our table. We want opportunities for our kids. We want healthcare for our families when they're sick. We don't want our homes burning down. We don't want our family farms going under. We want safe communities. Those are the things that bring us together across party lines. And so my focus, the work I've done in wildfire recovery, I can tell you it's a huge issue, especially in the district where we've lost a ton of homes in the Santiam Canyon Pass area. And wildfire does not check party affiliation when it goes through and destroys home. I led wildfire recovery down in Southern Oregon, where in a town where 1/3 of the homes and businesses were lost to wildfire, and brought in millions of dollars in federal funding and state funding as well to begin that process. Affordable housing, again, it crosses party lines. And so people want to be able to get the solutions, the kind of things. I'm working on an affordable housing project now, and have worked on affordable housing for teachers, for wildfire survivors, and also for kids terming out of foster care. Those are the things that cross party lines. And I think there's a misnomer about the sense of moderate. So of course, you work together to get things done. I was elected to a rural education service district board in Central Oregon, where the majority of my colleagues were conservative or Republicans. They selected me to be their chair, and we got some really important things moved forward. So being able to work across party lines is not about abandoning your values. It's about really leaning into creating solutions, working on drought issues with farmers. I've got a lot of strong relationships with folks who are proud Republicans because of the work and my effectiveness in actually getting things done. It starts with understanding the district, showing up, talking about solutions, and help moving things forward. On the drought issue, for example, we did a lot of drought's been a huge issue in Central Oregon. I actually convened a group of Republicans and Democrats behind the scenes, if you will, so we could have some robust conversations, folks at the local and county level. And we developed that water bank proposal, couldn't get it through the e-board a couple of years ago, and it since became one of the policies that the legislature has passed and funded. So that behind the scenes work is part of what I do, but also I've led publicly as well. But I think there's a misnomer sometimes between this thought of people want healthcare. Talk to conservative Republicans. They will be the greatest advocates for healthcare. And I've had this really funny experience in a very rural area talking to a very conservative Republican who talked, for example, about how he hated the thought of Medicare for All. It was a terrible program. But when I asked him to describe what his family wanted to see and what he wanted for his family, he described it to a T. So some of it is the being able to translate across the divide. Some of it is going to be able to put aside party politics. And what I'm known for is actually talking solutions and not using buzzwords. And when we do that, we create solutions. And I can tell you, to your point of most folks being not affiliated with either party in this district, there's a tremendous frustration with both parties. The sense that Republicans are not moving solutions forward, and the sense that Democrats, and I say this as a lifelong Democrat, are really frustrated with a perception that Democrats are all urban-based, all in the Portland metro area, are very condescending of rural folks. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that's what I hear from folks. And I get a lot of folks saying, you're one of the few Democrats that I can stomach because you actually understand our issues, you show up and you work on things we care about. And that's what we need, again, not just to win this district, but ultimately to serve this district well. Abortion and healthcare is just one of those issues where Lori has not been leading on it. She's been making excuses. She claims to be a moderate, but she's stepping back and not getting things done. But people trust you when they build relationships with you. So my comment about having relationships throughout the district is critically important. One last point.
Okay,
In
actually,
Deschutes County.
okay, let's
Okay,
to wrap
sure.
this up.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. You can just really short.
I'll just
wrap
say
it up.
one last point. In Deschutes County, which is over a quarter of the district, used to be in the old second, now a quarter of the fifth. I have outperformed every Democrat running for president since 1972. So a lot of people see me as a very purple Democrat, a rural Democrat, who also has served in Silicon Valley, actually in the city that was the home of Intel. So I can bridge that divide. I've got a proven track record, and that's why I have the support I do in the district.
Great, thank you. Janelle, same question for you, is just sort of kind of looking at the composition of your district. What are the specific stances or results that show that you kind of speak to that broader electorate that goes, beyond partisan Democrats?
Right. I think with my history of serving a purple district, what I've come to understand is understanding like who is the NAV voter. A lot of them are actually my kids' age. They are, they've been signed up through Motor Voter. They get the little, excuse me, sheet in the mail, and they don't, select a party for whatever reason. And what I've learned by knocking those doors over and over and over again and taking their calls, hearing them at town halls, is that they're concerned about student debt. That is a very big driver of the lack of wealth in our communities. They're also concerned about housing. So for instance, I'm a renter by proxy. I have 2 college-age kids. We're paying, I think, $1,900 a month and like close to $1,700 a month for the other one for rent. And when you think about the challenge that presents young people and their ability to launch and thrive, that's what they're concerned about. They're concerned about guns in public places, being safe at school and at work. There and there are also those who are concerned about their ability to realize the benefits, so to speak, or the promises of the Second Amendment. They are also concerned very much about water, the cleanliness of our water, the abundance of our water. It is those types of issues that are not red, they're not blue, they're just people issues. And one thing that really kind of comes to mind to me is while I'm a Democrat, I'm also a very practical Democrat. And bringing some of these practical questions to bear is what my job as a legislator is, and what it will be also as the future Congresswoman for CD5. So for instance, when we had this really bad snowstorm just a few months ago, it was really evident that people became upset when they were cold. We've had this push to eliminate wood burning stoves. And, in the spirit of, making sure that we had clean air. Great, great goal. We should be having clean air in all of our communities. But when you look at what happens when you lose access to electricity or you lose access to natural gas and people are cold, that's when they really remind you that they are a non-affiliated voter because they just want you, the balloons. They just want you, they just want you to solve the problems and they don't want you to make their lives worse. And so that is where I think the power of the NAV voter is. The other thing that's really important to keep in mind is that extremism is a really, really bad problem for democracy, whether it's extremism on the left, which is where I would put my opponent, or extremism on the right, which is where I would put the incumbent. It is a matter of how can you deliver very practical solutions for the average American, for the average Oregonian, that takes into account the real life impact of what legislation you're passing. The most important point to think about is now judges are having conversations about what are the impacts of their decisions, whereas legislators, we've always had to have that conversation with ourselves. So that's where I think the NAV voter is very important. I can look at my kids and tell exactly what's happening in America today because of those young voters.
So Janelle, I want to follow up a little bit. What are the positions that Jamie has taken that you find reflect an extremist left position or extremist left identity?
Well, I think it's a function of, can she deliver on the economy? She has no platform related to how we deliver jobs in CD5. I have the experience of delivering jobs for the entire state, as I mentioned, with the CHIPS Act. She has an extremist view on the economy, I'm sorry, on the environment. As I said, I'm sure she's one of those people that has pounded the pavement on we have to protect the environment at all costs without understanding that yes, we protect the environment, but we also try to make sure that we have the things that people need to make their lives a little bit easier. So one example is when we were doing the CHIPS Act, we had some environmental concerns. And one of the issues that people had was that they wanted us to use land that was infill type of land. But we didn't have the money. They weren't fighting for the money to get infrastructure to even build on that infill. So that's what I mean by the more extreme positions where you take a position on the environment, or you take a position on defund the police, or you take a position on protecting against, I don't know, spotted owl, just as an example. But you don't look at the practical ramifications of what actually happens. She's claiming that she has experience as an ESD elected board member, but to be honest, that is a position, as I understand, that sits in the shadows of a school board. Like, that's not real experience. That is volunteer work.
And Jamie, I'd like to give you a chance to respond. I don't want to get too much into a back and forth because I do actually want to follow up about clean energy. But if you want to take a couple minutes to respond, you may.
Yeah, no, really, really appreciate the opportunity. So on the environment, I'm proud to serve all Oregonians on the OWEB board, the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, where we work on working land issues with farmers and ranchers. And actually just saw Senator Knopp yesterday. My wife and I were at an event for there's a fundraiser for addressing child abuse issues in Bend in Central Oregon. Really appreciated his vote, his parting with his party, and Senator Hansel in reappointing me to the OWEB board. We don't have the luxury in rural areas of this allegation of extremism. We need to work together with our neighbors to actually get stuff done. So an interesting comment about the energy grid, and I've been a strong advocate for a long time of developing a renewable energy grid. Yes, I also feel strong about not leaving working families behind, but the fact that IBEW has endorsed me in this race is in part because of one, being a champion for working families in a lot of ways, but also this talk about a just transition to renewable energy. So we need to make that transition. We need to make those investments, but we also need to do it in a practical way. On the housing issue, and I say this as someone actually who's a certified planner, AICP, who's worked as a professional planner before as a city planner, part of what the legislature didn't get in this issue was you got to build up and not out. That takes away the whole land use issue. It doesn't run us afoul of Senate Bill 100 and the great work that the late Governor Tom McCall did on behalf of Oregonians, protecting small family farms like the one I lived on as a young person in Southern Oregon. But we need to make those investments in infrastructure, larger programs. You don't have SDC fund issues, But the other thing is through community development block grants, CDBG. Again, I was just talking to someone yesterday on affordable housing in Bend who's leading the Habitat for Humanity effort. And we were talking about strategically the things we can do at the federal level to assist the great work being done on the ground. The benefit of having been work for cities as a planner, as a city manager, and worked in wildfire recovery on the ground is you actually understand how these things get done. And I'm sure you all know how ESD boards work. ESDs actually cover specialty items, work in partnership with school boards. In the case of Jefferson County, it's for IT and special ed programs. So things like fully funding IDEA at the federal level will be key for that. But I just make that point because during COVID, the way that kids, especially in challenging areas like in Warm Springs, where a lot of folks didn't have a reception at all, could not engage in school without the work, the IT work that our ESD did. So it's really fundamental to education and also addressing those challenges that families are facing. There are a ton of other areas that I'd be happy to talk to, but I think I can't remember if there was another. Oh, defund. I have to speak to that as well, because this is one of those standard attacks. It's interesting coming from a Democrat. Last year, Lori tried this same attack, and the former chief of police of Bend, and actually I've got two former chief of police of Bend who are endorsing me in this race. They spoke up and they called that ridiculous. When I have worked as a city manager and led this effort, work with chief of police in cities here in Oregon, I believe very strongly in a high level of accountability and fully funding people to meet that effort. The other thing I did as a city manager and actually introduced was also wellness programs for our officers. That is a tough job. And when I worked as an interim city manager in talent, helping with wildfire recovery, the chief of police there didn't want me to leave because of the support I was providing to her and her team. So these are kind of, these are some of these carryover allegations that simply aren't true, but I appreciate the opportunity to speak to them.
Okay, great. Thank you. I wanted to kind of switch between who goes first, and I honestly lost track already. But why don't we start with you, Janelle, on this? Can you tell me just what your top priorities would be? What will people see 2 years from now if you're elected?
Sure. Reproductive health, protecting that right across the country. I think Oregon has been a leader on that issue, making sure that there's affordable access or even free access when women need it and how they need it. Number two is mental health supports. We are seeing across the country that challenges with obtaining mental health services and affordable health care in general, even after the Affordable Health Care Act, is important. One of the bills that we looked at, and we actually lost it this last session, was the citing of mental health facilities in commercial areas and residential areas. And I think if you look at it from the perspective of, say, as a mother, when we look at the impact of social media, we look at the lack of access to mental health supports for people who are having psychotic episodes or children in school, or even people who are housed in our prison facilities. Having access to mental health supports is very important. And I would say the third thing that I continue to mention over and over again is this infrastructure that we actually have to have. We have to have water infrastructure and road infrastructure in order to build more housing. One of the challenges that we're having with housing right now is that we haven't built enough over the last 10 years, and we're 10 years behind. So the issues that we're having are a function of supply and demand. They're also a function of some systemic issues that we're having in terms of, for instance, like having hedge funds buying whole neighborhoods. I think the city of Atlanta, I have a feeling it's over 30% of the city of Atlanta and the surrounding areas, for instance, are owned by private equity firms. The housing stock is owned by private equity firms. So housing is a very big issue for not just Oregon, but for the entire country. But how do we build more housing? We have to bring down the cost, and that is through infrastructure investments, as well as making sure that people can have access to purchasing homes, which I've also sponsored legislation on through the legislature as well. So those are the three issues I would say that are top of mind for me.
Great, thank you. And Jamie, what about you? What would be your top priorities?
Well, there are a couple big buckets, and there's a lot of issues within them. Some of them, things like protecting our democracy and our fundamental rights. It is absolutely codifying access to abortion health care, IVF. It's also voting rights. It's also things like the PRO Act, so the right to organize, and Marriage Equality Act. Those pieces are all part of, they would just be, getting that legislation forward and thumb up, thumb down, but moving that legislation forward. And I will say, actually, not all Oregonians currently have access to abortion health care because of the Hyde Amendment. So if you look at our 9 federally recognized tribes, those who only have access to Indian health care don't currently have access unless they're able to get outside of that system. So that understanding also of the realities that people are facing. But of course, if there's federal legislation that takes away that right, all those rights go away. So that's a big one. Protecting our democracy is part of that bucket as well. And that's both what we do here in this country to reduce the impact of big money in politics. I'm very proud I don't take corporate PAC money. I never have in the 20 years I've been in office. I'm the only one in this race, either primary or the general, who can say that. And so that piece is also really important in terms of building up not just public trust, but also that confidence in our elections. Our international partnerships are part of that as well. The other big piece for our environment you touched on before, and this is the number one issue I hear from young people, is concerns about actually even having a future. So we saw there was a bipartisan infrastructure bill that made many investments. A lot of those were going to come here to Oregon regarding investments in renewable energy. Lori Chavez-DeRemer was part of that clawback. We need to reinvest those so we can build a renewable energy grid and storage and some of those other things that go with both those long-term solutions and those short-term solutions. There's some reauthorizations that are part of these different buckets. So for example, the Stafford Act, in reauthorizing it, make sure it includes heat domes. That's one of the challenges we're facing. We had some tragic deaths in not central Oregon, but in the Willamette Valley of farm workers. The Stafford Act, which funds FEMA, does not recognize some of those things like heat domes. But the thing I'd spend the most of my time are on working family issues, the everyday Oregonians, retirees, people on fixed incomes. So it is things like affordable housing. And yes, there's those different structures in place, making infrastructure investments, but also, again, understanding how these things work. It's really important to have that understanding in both urban and rural areas. A handful of years ago, the legislature started to pass housing bills, and that was great, except they were great for the Portland metro area and actually hurt affordable housing development outside the Portland metro area. And those having that understanding of when bills are written is really important. But healthcare, expanding healthcare, whether it is a more comprehensive, everyone getting access to healthcare, which is long-term vision. We're the only industrialized country that doesn't do it. And there's public-private models that are out there that we could follow. But even taking steps of reducing prescription drug costs, that's across the board. People are interested in that. Some of the reductions we're seeing in those cost overruns and those issues, education and investing in education. I have proposed a civilian GI Bill that would actually allow people who are afraid of going into debt. My own kids are in that situation right now, but we also need folks like nurses and teachers, but people who are afraid of going into debt. They could essentially sign a promissory note, sign up, get the education, and then work in areas where they're needed, in rural areas, in inner city areas, and pay things off. It's like the reverse of the GI Bill. But childcare, food security is huge, especially in Central Oregon. And farmers, local farmers, are working to address those issues so they could get support through reauthorization of the Farm Bill. I just had an op-ed piece in the Bend Bulletin on this, talking about how we need to reauthorize to increase access to SNAP benefits. But food security is both having food, but also having access to healthy food. Retirement dignity, the attacks on Social Security. So I appreciate that sense of just focus on a couple things, but you got to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. There's a lot of issues that need to be addressed.
Right. Okay. I would like to kind of go back to the clean energy question. And Janelle made reference to, and I want to drill a little bit more into kind of this question about how do you get to a clean energy future. And there have been a number of initiatives in Oregon and elsewhere, for instance, about banning infrastructure or new infrastructure with natural gas hookups. Biden has a new EV mandate for manufacturers out. Is that the way to go? Do you think that there is that we should be banning natural gas and new infrastructure, that that there need to be these mandates regarding electric vehicle manufacture?
The driving force has to be maintaining a steady energy grid. That's got to be the leading charge on that. And we don't have the proposals that are being put forward to simply cut off some resources do not allow us to do that. So when I served on the Santa Clara City Council, this is a major city in Silicon Valley, actually the home of Intel. The city also owns its own power utility. And I then played a role and became very familiar on this and really led the charge of the city meeting their renewable energy goals years ahead of time. Also, actually, recycled water and a lot of other environmental friendly waste reduction around plastic bags. When I got on that council, the part of the city's energy portfolio included coal-fired plants. What we did is first invested in scrubbers, and then we moved the city off that to natural gas because that was part of the transition. And so the new power plant that went to the city was actually natural gas. You've got to maintain the overall energy grid and work in a positive transition to the direction of renewable energy. During the time I was on that council, we also actually began to purchase renewable energy from Northern Oregon and the wind farms. So you have to look at where you're at, where you need to go, and maintain that sense of a consistent energy grid and making the investments necessary to get there. So we could not flip the switch tomorrow. It would not maintain the grid. But we have to also challenge ourselves to have an aggressive approach to that so that we can have a clean energy future. But it's everything from both the overall grid. We also need to look at storage. We also need to look at microgrids, because that's not just about tapping into a national grid. That's also when we have Cascadia, and this is putting on my emergency response hat, we will have a lot of parts of the state that do not have access to the grid. It'll be down and gone. So we have to take a multiple layer approach, and we have to understand the tools that are available. But you don't, you have to go from point A to point B, maintaining that grid. And simply turning off systems that you don't have access to, that you can't then make up that grid is not an option. The other piece on renewable energy is so many Democrats and a lot of the legislation that's come through is focused on just passenger vehicles. And I received an earful from a hardcore Dem who says every vehicle that's gas fuel should just be stopped and revoked. Well, when you talk to farmers, they're more than eager to move forward on this. But at the same time, one, the technology needs to be there. And two, they need to have help with the investment so they can purchase the equipment. That's why reauthorization of the Farm Bill, incorporating that in, is so critically important. So we have to get away from urban areas, focus on climate change, rural areas, this assumption that people don't care. It's the people who are farmers and ranchers who have more concern and more passion about climate change. I might not call it climate change, they call it other things, but who are more passionate about protecting soil and water and conserving things than even a lot of folks in urban areas.
So
in Oregon,
let me stop you there and just,
yeah.
So one of the aspects is, you talked a lot about energy source, but there's also like the aspect of a mandate on manufacturers that this percentage has to be EV or hybrid, and Oregon certainly has adopted that standard as well. But in terms of prohibiting sales of gas fueled cars starting in 2035. So I guess what I'm wondering, is that an appropriate way? I mean, do you feel like that is that we need to be cutting down choices for consumers? If you want, I mean, that is one way to look at it.
You need both a carrot and stick approach. So if you cut down options, you also need to provide the options of where people can go to get that. That's the real key on that. And so that was like the example I was trying to give with farmers and moving some of those high-powered diesel vehicles. It's the same with the trucking industry. But we need to be incentivizing and investing in R&D. As an engineer, I'm a big fan of R&D, but we need to be investing in that, and then also creating those pressures, but you can't just say no. You've got to give people an option of where they can go and then make the investments so that they can actually do it. When I'm talking to truckers, when I'm talking to farmers, they're not against this movement. What they're frustrated is they're not getting the investments in the technology to have the options, and they're frustrated on the door being shut without them. It's going to bankrupt them as proposed. That's why that's why meeting with folks and understanding their issues is so critically important. You can't just do one or the other.
Great. Janelle, same question for you in terms of like looking at the clean energy approach and how to get to a clean energy future. What is the path that you would take? And do you have any specific thoughts about either policies adopted in Oregon or that are under discussion or have been adopted nationally about those approaches?
So I think the most important thing to remember is that there's still a market, right? And so customers have told us, and you've been, I'm sure, reading that customers aren't really keen on electric vehicles yet because there's not the infrastructure. So I think from a federal standpoint, when you make a mandate, you still have to make it simple and easy for people to use and comply. When it's very difficult, it doesn't work. And you end up pouring money into subsidies that is just wasting taxpayer dollars. So for me, this past legislative session, I sponsored the Clean Manufacturing Bill, Clean Manufacturing Energy Bill. And what we were trying to do is innovate. And I think that is where Oregon can be a leader. So just like we are a leader on chips and semiconductor manufacturing, I believe too, we can be a clean energy hub for research and innovation and development. One of the things that I learned during the multiple walkouts about our climate bill in the legislature was, again, that people felt that their cost of living was going to go up. And as much as we had goals, and as much as I have a personal demand and desire for clean air and clean water, when you're making decisions between your prescription drugs and your gas to get to work, or your gas to farm your field, or you're making a decision between food, then all of that matters. And so what we need are legislators that understand what are the practical impacts of the legislation that we're proposing, and how do we get there from A to Z in a way that A, the market will sustain, B, we can innovate through, and people will comply without screaming and yelling bloody murder. And I think that is the type of practical leadership. You can have a whole lot of word soup about what's important, but I can tell you at the end of the day, the kitchen table issues are what are going to drive middle America. And it's also what separates people like me from both of my opponents. Some will say just eat the higher costs. I don't believe Americans want to do that just yet. I do think we need to have shared sacrifice in making sure that our kids have clean air and clean water that they can breathe and recreate in for years. But I also know that the practical implications are that, for instance, like if you don't have safe bike lanes, like we have bike lanes right outside my door, but you know what? If they're not cleaned and swept on the regular basis, they don't matter. If they're not practical and usable, if we're not innovating our way out of our challenges, then they won't work.
Great.
Helen, can I make, and I agree with Janelle on that practical approach. I think we're saying the same thing there. But one other point, just as an example, I think for all of us, is urgency will drive this. And so when I was in law school and worked and intern for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, they were talking about how the U.S. military is moving to renewable energy because of supply line issues. So they have that sense of urgency. And so I was actually surprised at how innovative in terms of environmental issues the U.S. Army is being.
Right.
And
they
so
also have the federal budget behind them, which most households are not going to. But I understand point taken. I do want to move on because we are don't have a whole lot of time left. And this next question, and I guess I will start with you, Janelle, is very broad. And I'm going to allow, you can pick any two issues. But you've got from the war in Gaza and Biden's handling of it, to immigration policy, aid in Ukraine, healthcare, and actually just take any one or two of those four, and tell me about, like, how would you approach either trying to address it, trying to break through the logjam that has been in Congress? I guess, what will your presence do to change the dynamic on any of those?
Thanks. I think Democrats would be wise to take the immigration issues seriously, our border issues very seriously. Um, what has been researched is that Americans are open to fast and fair hearings. So when people come to the border for asylum or for whatever their reason is for seeking entry into the country, it should be swift and efficient. And I think that the challenge right now is that it's not. We have people lingering in limbo, in some sort of status limbo for way too long. And it's not safe for anyone. It's not safe for the people who are coming here. It's not safe for those border communities. And it's not safe, I think, for the national discourse, because it villainizes people who are coming. And this nation has been a nation of people who welcome people with open arms. And so we know that our immigration, that our economy is driven by immigrants. We know that. And it's been politicized by Republicans unfairly. So, we had a deal and then they wanted to back out because they wanted to continue politicizing it. Again, I think the fast and fair hearings is important. And then there's also research that suggests that making sure that people have work requirements once they're here, if they are waiting for their hearing, there is dignity in work, and having productive lives while you're waiting is something that Americans support. I will just say that across the world, what we're seeing is a challenge to democracy. And so the conversation to me is about democracy versus autocracy. So whether that's in the Middle East, whether that's in China, whether that's in Ukraine, whether that's in Haiti, and we're not talking enough about that. Whether the issue is here, the United States is supposed to stand up to be a beacon for democracy. Those are our values, and that's where we should be planting our feet firmly and maintaining our seat at the table.
Great, thank you. Jamie, in terms of the vast number of crises taking place, what would your presence do to change the dynamic?
Yeah, well, I think the piece is building partnerships across the divide, because there's a lot of room for agreement on these things. In Ukraine, Putin puts the world at risk of World War III, and our investments there and those bipartisan investments help to keep U.S. troops from having to engage there. He's made it really clear who he is. That containment is critically important. So I think that support is important. And also understanding areas that are in crisis. I always believe in leading with diplomacy, but at the same time, the world can be a dangerous place, and being aware of that and making those appropriate investments and supporting our troops when they go abroad in their needs, and also our veterans when they come back home, because that's a commitment they've made. As a kid, I actually lived in East Africa. My mom took a teaching job in East Africa for a couple of years before we moved back to the States in Southern Oregon. And so I've seen the U.S. perspective, or seen the perspective on the U.S. from outside. We in the past have been this vision of hope and democracy for folks, and we've really lost that status. We lost that status horribly under Trump. Regaining that helps to build our international stature. And as I mentioned, I began my public service over in Bosnia and Kosovo. I believe in this so much. I put myself in harm's way in areas that are strewn with landmines to repair schools and hospitals to help people rebuild their lives. On immigration, again, I think this is an opportunity for a bipartisan solution. Folks want to see immigration reform across the spectrum. So yes, I agree we need better investments, so quicker processing times at the border. And that's actually something I've got experience in when I led a refugee resettlement office. We also had an immigration component. But this is an issue, talking to farmers in Central Oregon, They want to see comprehensive immigration reform. You talk to families who are farm workers who want family reunification. You talk to DACA folks who are DACA recipients who want their recognition of their status. There's all sorts of opportunities for reform and for bipartisan reform on this issue, but you've got to be able to work across the aisle. You've got to understand the issues. You got to have shown up and had the conversations. And, there's people in the district who I could bring to the table, Republican, Democrat, and non-affiliated today, to have a conversation and push for comprehensive immigration reform. That's how we're going to get it done.
Great. Jamie, this question is for you. And it's got two parts to it. The first is that there have been stories in recent years questioning how you've treated staffers, allegations of bullying. So I would like you to address that, but also just kind of considering Representative Bynum, and she noted this in her opening remarks, she beat Lori Chavez-DeRemer twice. And in your last matchup, Lori Chavez-DeRemer won. So what would you tell Democrats who want to retake this seat? That how would you assure them that you are the right pick?
Yeah, absolutely. And a couple things. First, to the allegations, and kudos to Sammy for actually investigating and having conversation. There was two things. There was one, a false allegation of hitting is just flat out untrue. It was also promoted, and if you look at the article, and Sammy also was able to research and show these connections by someone who is a donor and a senior advisor to Janelle's team. That's the only person who's gone on the record who pushed and made that statement. So it's a false claim, and that will be responded to. Actually, in contrast, if there's interest in this, looking into the fact that Janelle has actually been sued by her former employees for defamation and other things, that's all public record. In terms of staffing and perspectives, that I'm a tough boss. I've had jobs where lives, public health, and fundamental rights were on the line, in jobs that they weren't. It's a very different dynamic. And just to give a sense, in your business, it's about accuracy and deadlines. But I do ask a lot of myself, and when people are depending on us, I've asked a lot of my team as well. And people always have the opportunity to step away, but most have been really inspired and challenged by that. So this was true when I led post-war reconstruction in Bosnia and Kosovo. My team wanted me to stay on there when I wanted to come back to the States. And actually a recent LTE of someone who went in Kosovo 10 years later, people were still grateful for the leadership I showed. This was true when I led refugee resettlement for the IRC, and many of my staff, former refugees, wanted me to stay on. They've actually written recent testimonials, but unfortunately that's not newsworthy and has gotten attention. When I led wildfire recovery, again, these are all examples of high stressed environments. In talent, my staff wanted me to stay on when I wanted to come back to Central Oregon. Many have written testimonials and spoken on my behalf. When I ran for Congress in 2018 against Greg Walden in the old 2nd Congressional District, which was 2/3 of the state, everything east of the Cascades in Southern Oregon, he was going after healthcare, and a lot of the folks I started working with then work with me, the key staff members work with me through last year. Early last year, they were hired away to work for US senators. So that's why they're not working with me this cycle. And in 2022, we had several folks on the record who talked about being inspired by my leadership, wanting to work with me. There have been allegations of folks who have been made anonymously. I will say that campaigns are stressful by nature and not for everyone. But if anyone feels stress or discomfort, I have apologized. I will apologize again. As a leader, you can always learn and grow, and I pride myself on that. We actually do plus deltas after major projects. We've done that after 2022 with our team. Unfortunately, it seems that some of these positive stories are not newsworthy, but even these stories have been pitched by Janelle's team going back to last summer. We've heard this for folks not associated with either campaign, that they've really been pushing these stories because and up so high and so popular in the district, the strategic political thinking was the only way to weaken me was to defame my character. Again, she's got an example of having done that on record with former employees with defamation. But there's a difference between
and you're going to respond to the part about that why you're the Democrats' better choice.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But I'll say one other thing on this point is there's a point also that I think is noteworthy of when your colleagues choose you to lead and when they don't. And that is really another major focus on this issue, and something, again, we haven't been pushing negative stories, but I would challenge you all to think about this. When, in both of our cases, myself and Janelle, we've had opportunities where our colleagues there's been a question whether our colleagues wanted to leave. She wanted to be speaker. She pushed really hard on that. She actually made an accusation of the governor that made an OPB article, and her colleagues said no. It's one thing when colleagues support you to lead them. It's another thing when they support you to take another job. But in my case, I have been supported from back in high school. I was supported in Ashland to be the co-captain of the team. I have been in management dispute. I've been selected to negotiate on behalf of my colleagues. And the last point on that, in Central Oregon, the ESD, which Janelle has kind of been dismissive of, my Republican colleagues chose me to be chair, and when I led on efforts. So that, I think, is noteworthy.
Okay.
With regard to the 5th Congressional District.
You know what? I think actually that's taken a lot of time. I think Janelle might be having some connection issues, so she's coming back on.
Just as she comes back on.
Right, girl. You know what? I think we're good. I'd really like to move to Janelle. I'm not sure if I'm assuming you heard most of that. And Janelle, I would like, you're welcome to respond to what Jamie said. I do have a question specifically for you as well. If you want to go, I don't know if you want to respond first.
Thank you for the opportunity to respond. I believe that leadership is something that you cast the shadow of a leadership. It's one thing that we talk about at McDonald's, and we walk our walk and we talk our talk. And I have a very strong track record of treating my employees very, very well. I don't have allegations of hitting them. Which I think is pretty serious. People can disagree about what you say about them, and I, in fact, don't know the employee that made the claim. So there's that. But I can say that my employees speak very highly of me and are delighted to work for me on the regular. I also am known in the community as not someone who is physically intimidating, and I don't brag about trying to be physically intimidating. So I'm really happy that this is over Zoom because I've been warned that my opponent will try to use that. Your second question about...
well, let me just ask, is there a defamation lawsuit right now?
No.
Okay.
You can check court records. It was settled.
I didn't interrupt you, Jamie, so it's...
Let's, we can move on to this question. Janelle, you've only operated in a legislature and a state government dominated by Democrats. There's no such guarantee for Congress, and it is very possible that Donald Trump could win election.
Yeah.
How effective do you think you can be in an environment where Democrats do not have control?
I've always been the outsider as an African American woman. I've never been able to take for granted that everyone saw things the way that I have seen things, or everyone has the same lived experience. And so that has made me extremely skilled at being able to reach across the aisle, even reach across the aisle in terms of Democrats that I may not necessarily agree with on every issue. I think my experience as a swing seat in the legislature has given me far more experience than Jamie, as well as Lori Chavez-DeRemer. Having to explain to my Democratic colleagues, for instance, when I was working on the CHIPS Act, that, all of these great social programs that we believe need to happen to protect the vulnerable and to meet the needs of the people. Hey, friends, guess what? We have to pay for them. I am also the person that signs the front of a paycheck. So I understand what it's like to have to meet payroll. I understand what it's like to have to pay taxes. And I understand what it's like to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and check the bank account to make sure there's enough in there. When the economy goes south, we feel it first. And so those are unique experiences, I think, that make sure that I can always work across the aisle, that while I have shared values with Democrats, we are not a monolith. We don't all agree on everything. And having served in this swing district, my voters have been socially progressive and fiscally conservative. I also think that you're seeing a rise in the state of some fiscal conservatism because people are now demanding more accountability for the money that they're paying in taxes. You all reported just recently that there was a poll that Portlanders weren't interested in raising the education taxes. I think they were going to go at the same level that they had before. People are looking at their tax bills and they're asking for accountability. I've always been someone that has raised the flag about what it costs to run a household, what it costs to maintain a small business, and what it costs to make sure that our state's economy is thriving so that our children have some place to come home to. When they graduate from high school, when they graduate from college, when they graduate from their trade school, we want to make sure that Oregonians have jobs. And that is what I have been focused on. That is what makes me different from either candidate. And that is what makes that is what makes me the candidate that should be the next Congresswoman from CD5.
Are there a couple examples, Janelle, where you can point to where you have voted firmly against the majority of Democrats in the caucus?
Yeah, there was a tort reform bill that was coupled with non-unanimous juries, and I voted no. I voted no because I believed that Democrats had, I think it was a mistake to couple the social issue of non-unanimous juries, which we know disproportionately affect Black people and brown people, with tort reform that allowed lawyers to sue for more. Like I felt that the using of Black bodies to pass legislation was wrong. There's another case, and I don't remember all of the specific details, but I remember having to have the courage to stand up for consistency when we were talking about look back periods or statute of limitations for sexual assault. And I remember sitting in committee asking my colleague, like, I was asking questions about, well, if this circumstance is XYZ years and this circumstance is XYZ years, like, why don't we have consistent standards so that victims don't have to guess what their rights are? And so that when we talk with our sons, they understand what the ramifications are and what the risks are when you do bad things. And so I voted no on the floor as a flag. And sometimes people don't understand that in the legislative terms. There are certain techniques that you use to raise an issue. You can write a letter, you can do a vote explanation, you can vote no. And my colleague Paul Evans will say, I'm going to put down a marker and I'm going to vote no because I want this to be an issue that's on the record. So that's what I did. And when that bill went over to the Senate, they asked, why did Bynum vote no? She was the lone vote. And they knew that it took courage. They fixed it and sent it back to us.
Great, thank you. I would like to give you guys each 1 minute with kind of a real 1 minute limit on as a kind of closing wrap up statement. And Jamie, do you want to go first on this?
Yeah, sure. And just actually as a follow-up to that, voting against protection for rape victims vote, when they came back, it had reduced the statute of limitations. So voting against was voting against Republicans and Democrats who were unanimous in supporting an extension of protection to rape victims to 7 years. Janelle was the only lone no vote against that.
We wanted consistency.
And you just cut me off, so we're one for one on that one, Janelle. We're one for one on that one.
Consistency saves lives.
And Janelle, if you want to respond to that, you can do that in your closing.
Yeah, I just want to make sure she
doesn't
get away
winning the
with
district,
with making up facts.
Okay.
Should I wait till she's done? Okay. I actually outperformed our elected governor by 7 points in the district last cycle. This is Oregon's only purple district. I am best positioned to win in November. And also in terms of the beating Lori, I beat Lori in the Portland metro area as well. That's not hard. When Janelle ran against Lori in 2016, she actually lost in Clackamas County. I beat Lori in Multnomah, Clackamas, and Deschutes. you're going to have a Democrat to win this district is going to have to win all of those areas, but also especially win in Deschutes and Clackamas. And so that's an area that Janelle's actually lost to Lori when you actually get into the details on the numbers. So the strength throughout the district, the understanding of the issues, the commitment, the longstanding commitment to the issues that Oregonians in the district care about is why I'm best positioned to win. And also the network I have, I've been up over 30 points in multiple, both ours and independent primary polls showing that strength, both for in the primary, but also now that Lori has a voting record that is not good for Oregonians, we'll be able to beat her in November. And I'm the only Democrat who can make that claim. But thanks so much for your time and all the work you all do. Really appreciate it.
Great, thank you. And Janelle, closing remarks from you?
Thank you. I think it's important to recognize that the reason we have a Republican majority in the House today is because CD5 was lost. And it's also important to recognize that I was asked to run by grassroots Oregonians and supported at the highest levels because this race was lost the last cycle. I am a person who has proven that I can win, and it's not where you beat Lori Chavez-DeRemer, it's if you beat her. And I have beaten her not once, but twice. I did not have political experience when I ran. I came out with values. I'm sorry these balloons came up. That was not intentional.
No problem.
I have the values and I have the practical understanding of what Oregonians are desiring from their elected leaders. I have shown the courage. I have shown the grace under pressure. I have shown a willingness to stand up when things get hard, and I've shown a willingness to make sure that everybody's voices were heard at the table. Oregonians want to make sure they have roofs over their head, their children have a strong education, their prescription drugs aren't eating them out of house and home, that they have clean air and clean water. These are all issues that I've led on. And again, I've beaten Lori Chavez-DeRemer, not once, but twice, and I'm ready to do it a third time.
Great. Thank you both. This was a really interesting conversation. You've given us a lot to think about. I also apologize in case the random balloons, because I know they came up when Betsy was on as well. If that's happening on my end somehow, it's very possible. But I appreciate your time. We will follow up with any additional questions that we have. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for all you do.
Thank you.